A remark circulated through British media, attributed to Sarah Ferguson, Duchess of York, though no specific podcast episode date or independent corroboration has been established, that she had described one of her daughter's holidays as a shagging weekend. Whether the precise wording survives scrutiny is secondary to the velocity at which it spread, because things move at that speed when they feel true, rather than merely surprising. Not outrageous in isolation, characteristic. The ordinary calculation about what is wise to say on a recorded platform about your own children, the reflexive assessment of consequence that most adults make automatically, appeared to have simply not been made, as though it hadn't occurred to anyone that it needed to be. That still isn't the most damning thing about this family. This is a story about money. Where it comes from, under what arrangements it flows, whose relationships sustain it across years. Every personality in its secondary. The peripheral celebrity of people who were born into an institution and spent their adult lives converting that inheritance into commercial access is secondary. What matters is the documentary record, the civil court findings, the royal historian's sourced account, the forensic accountant's request, and the specific pattern of choices that the assembled evidence, presented chronologically, describes with more precision than any opinion column has managed. The House of York holds a position inside the British monarchy that is structurally unusual and financially consequential. Its members are royal enough to move through the world with every advantage the title provides: the open doors in boardrooms, the deference in rooms where serious money moves, the invitations to private estates in the Caribbean, because the surname ensures those invitations arrive. They aren't, formally, funded by the sovereign grant in the way working senior members of the royal family are. Beatrice and Eugenie hold their titles. They attend state occasions. They carry the social capital of the crown into every commercial context they enter. The formal accountability mechanisms that attach to public funding, the transparency requirements, the external oversight, the expense reporting, don't follow them with equivalent rigor. This gap between privilege and accountability is structural rather than accidental. Across 3 decades, it's the architecture through which a family has built a lifestyle that no publicly disclosed income can credibly explain. Sarah Ferguson's financial record establishes that template early. She accumulated personal debts running into the millions during the 1990s, and the palace absorbed it. She continued to operate commercially in the space that proximity to Prince Andrew provided. Then, in 2010, journalists from the News of the World ran an undercover operation. On camera, Ferguson appeared to offer access to Prince Andrew, then holding the official government designation of United Kingdom Special Representative for International Trade and Investment, in exchange for £500,000 in cash. She acknowledged the incident, apologized publicly, and insisted Andrew had no knowledge of the arrangement. No criminal charges were brought, and no formal institutional sanction followed. Andrew remained in his trade role for another year. Financial impropriety surfaced, public acknowledgement followed, the institution moved on, and the foundational question, how does this family sustain its lifestyle, through whose money, under what specific arrangements, went permanently unexamined. Beatrice and Eugenie were raised inside that operational structure and entered adult life carrying its assumptions. They took positions in the private sector and attended the events their social standing required, maintaining, across years, a visible standard of living that their documented employment history can't plausibly explain. For Princess Beatrice specifically, the Daily Mail, citing analysis from a named royal expert, reported that she took 17 holidays in a single year during a period when her documented annual salary stood at £19,500. The report asked directly whether scrutiny was required about how her jaunts were funded amidst Epstein revelations. That figure comes from attributed newspaper analysis rather than disclosed financial records. The arithmetic does not shift meaningfully whether the precise number is 17 or 12 or 23. A salary of £19,500 in London covers rent, barely, and food, barely. It does not, after tax and basic expenditure, leave a budget for 17 international trips across a single calendar year. The Italian summers where dinner at the relevant tables runs to 4 figures a head, the Alpine weeks where the appropriate chalets cost more than a British hospital nurse earns in a month, the Caribbean visits to properties where the return journey is by helicopter because there is no other way in or out. What job allows that? As one widely shared comment on the reporting framed it, with the emphasis of someone who has already done the arithmetic and arrived at a number that no honest accounting can produce. Beyond the reported holiday figures, the most concrete financial irregularity in the documented records surrounding the York sisters comes not from tabloid analysis, but from a civil court case, verified at high confidence. In 2022, legal proceedings involving a businessman named Selman Turk, who had faced action for embezzlement, revealed that money connected to Turk, channeled through financial entities including Alphabet Capital and an individual named Adrian Gleave, had been routed through the bank account of one of the York princesses. The full mechanics of the transaction weren't established in available reporting, and whether the account holder was aware of the nature of what was moving through it wasn't conclusively determined. Royal historian Andrew Lowney, whose documented account of the case remains the most thoroughly sourced public record available, drew the implication with characteristic restraint. This money was being channeled through the daughter's bank account, so one wonders how many other funds have been channeled through their bank accounts. That question, grounded in a civil court case and posed by a credentialed royal historian, produced no formal journalistic follow-up from any British institution with the resources to pursue it. Money connected to a convicted embezzler was traced, in court proceedings, to a royal bank account. That finding sits in the public record and has generated no formal investigation. The palace itself documented concern about specific commercial activities during this period. Reports indicated that Princess Beatrice had traveled to Saudi Arabia in a capacity blending private commercial interests with the social capital her royal connections provided, leveraging, in effect, a contacts book built partly during overseas trade trips that weren't private journeys. Available coverage described the palace's reaction in terms worth preserving precisely. A concern that Beatrice was following in her parents' footsteps. Her father's footsteps had led through years of commercially lucrative relationships with foreign governments, pursued under the HRH designation, generating substantial financial benefit whose full dimensions remain publicly undisclosed, and her mother's had led to a hidden camera and an apparent offer to sell access for £500,000. That concern at the palace wasn't hypothetical or abstract. It was a documented institutional response to the possibility of a third generation repeating a commercial template the first two had already established in embarrassing and recorded detail. In January 2024, the United States Department of Justice released sealed court documents from the criminal prosecutions built around Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Epstein, the American financier and convicted sex offender, who died in federal custody in August 2019 whilst awaiting trial on federal sex trafficking charges, had spent 3 decades constructing a social infrastructure extending across multiple continents and into the highest levels of political and financial power. Maxwell was convicted in December 2021 on 5 counts of sex trafficking and related offenses and sentenced to 20 years in prison. The documents released in early 2024 represented materials sealed through years of litigation, correspondence, depositions, victim testimony, and the record of who had moved through the world Epstein built. That world was anchored in specific properties, a Manhattan townhouse on the Upper East Side, a Florida estate in Palm Beach, and a private island in the United States Virgin Islands called Little St. James, whose Caribbean remoteness wasn't incidental to what prosecutors documented occurring there, but operationally essential to it. Multiple outlets reported in the days following the DOJ release that the names of Princesses Beatrice and Eugenie appeared in those documents hundreds of times. The available reporting does not document either sister visiting Epstein's island. That specific connection hasn't been evidenced in available materials. What those reported file appearances reflect is the social reality of a family whose patriarch maintained a sustained, close relationship with Epstein across more than a decade. Prince Andrew's association with Epstein wasn't seriously in dispute. The stays at the Manhattan townhouse, the visits to the Palm Beach estate, the friendship maintained years after Epstein's Florida conviction. The BBC Newsnight interview of 2019, in which Andrew described a night at a Pizza Express in Woking as though the precision of the alibi were itself exculpatory, and cited an inability to sweat as though it were exculpatory. None of this was contested in its basic outline. Andrew settled a civil lawsuit brought by a woman who claimed she was trafficked. His royal duties had already been stripped. His daughters, appearing in the documentary record of the most consequential sex trafficking prosecution in modern Western history, is a direct consequence of their father's choices across more than a decade. What financial arrangements accompanied those choices? What the family received, what was understood at the time, and when, has never been subjected to independent examination. The Epstein files are public, the questions they generate are specific, and the investigation those questions demand hasn't taken place. A second alleged connection, circulating in public commentary with a frequency and specificity that demands direct acknowledgement, involves a separate convicted predator and a separate private island. Peter Nygard is a Canadian fashion executive who, according to available reporting, entered a guilty plea to sex trafficking charges and is currently serving a prison sentence. Claims that require independent confirmation from court records before broadcast. His private estate in the Bahamas, Nygard Key, attracted prosecution claims structurally similar to those surrounding Little St. James, a private island accessible only at the owner's invitation, maintained in a manner that communicated absolute control, where young women were brought into proximity to concentrated wealth in circumstances prosecutors described without ambiguity. The allegation circulating in commentary about the York family is that members of that family visited Nygard Key. Court filings, verified journalism, and primary-sourced reporting haven't placed specific York family members on Nygard's property. The claim exists in public commentary rather than in the documentary record, and requires independent investigative work, substantiation or refutation by someone with the access and legal standing to pursue it properly. Two alleged associations with the social worlds of convicted sex offenders, two private islands in the Caribbean, two operations built around wealth, remoteness, and controlled access that served, according to prosecutors in both cases, as the operational infrastructure of systematic abuse. Even the unverified portion carries additive weight within the documented pattern. The audience commentary most persistently engaged with this story captured the charge in a single line that institutional journalism hasn't matched for economy. They could have said no, but they kept taking money. That sentence does not allege direct criminal participation. It alleges something more durable and more specifically indicting, that sustained presence within the financial and social orbit of these men, maintained across years during which the character of their conduct would have been visible to anyone paying attention, reflects a deliberate series of choices. Choices sustained by financial benefit, and whose documentation an independent forensic audit was specifically designed to examine. A third allegation circulating in this territory involves a figure named David Taylor, described in public commentary as having faced accusations of espionage on behalf of China and as having accompanied Princess Beatrice on travel. Court documentation, verified journalism, or named sourcing supporting this specific claim hasn't surfaced in available reporting. It's an allegation requiring independent investigative scrutiny, not because it's confirmed, but because the national security dimension it would add, layered over financial irregularities already established in court proceedings, and a family already documented operating at the intersection of royal adjacency and foreign government commercial relationships, represents exactly the kind of question that formal accountability exists to answer. Food bank usage across the United Kingdom reached record levels in 2023 and 2024, with millions of working people in full-time employment turning to charitable food distribution to feed their families. Against that backdrop, a family leveraging royal adjacency to generate income streams, never subjected to formal scrutiny, declining the opportunity to demonstrate those streams are legitimate, isn't a story about celebrity dysfunction. It's a story about which people in this country are required to explain themselves and which people have demonstrated, across 30 years, that they aren't. Prince William spent years undertaking the politically complicated work of distancing the institution from peripheral family members whose conduct damaged it. Andrew's removal from royal duties wasn't the product of parliamentary process. It was the result of sustained internal pressure, with William's documented position on the record, following the catastrophic Newsnight interview and the subsequent civil settlement with the woman who alleged she was trafficked. The post-Epstein period saw the deliberate scaling back of the York family's formal royal presence, and Andrew's commercially lucrative relationships with foreign governments were wound down. The project of contracting the institution to its most accountable and justifiable form has been visible throughout this period as deliberate, sustained policy. Within that project, requesting that Beatrice and Eugenie submit to an independent financial examiner is the logical continuation, the step that the modernization program implies, and that the documented pattern of financial opacity specifically required. Royal historian Andrew Lowney reported that Prince William's advisors asked both princesses to submit their finances to an independent forensic accountant. Both refused. Lowney's language does not require embellishment. I think they were asked if they would have their material audited by William, and they refused to do so, which doesn't send out, after all, very encouraging signs. Those words are measured rather than inflammatory. They don't assert criminality, but observe a refusal and identify its implication with the precision of someone who has spent years in the documentary record of this family's finances and understands what the assembled pattern describes. An independent forensic audit would have produced answers: documented income versus documented lifestyle, the £19,500 salary against 17 reported international trips, the Selman Turk money traced through Alphabet Capital and Adrian Gleave to a royal bank account, the Saudi Arabia commercial contacts leveraged under royal cover. Each element requires explanation that no public record currently contains. Refusing the audit ensured none of those explanations would ever be compelled. In that refusal lies the single most significant act in this entire documented record, more significant than any individual transaction or association, because it was the specific, sourceable moment when the opportunity to establish innocence was explicitly declined. Unexplained money connected to a convicted embezzler, traced through a royal bank account in civil court proceedings, sits unresolved in the public record. 17 reported holidays against a £19,500 salary remain unanswered, as do hundreds of reported name appearances in the federal trafficking prosecution's documentary record. The palace's own documented alarm about Saudi commercial activities, the Nygard allegation requiring verification, the David Taylor claim requiring independent investigation. Every thread in this record leads to the audit that was offered, that was available, and that both sisters explicitly declined. Innocent people agree to audits. Subscribe for more stories like this.